But when I came to Vancouver, it's no Amsterdam, but I certainly saw, what I saw was, I was very impressed with in terms of some of the infrastructure here, the fact that you've got the bike routes Ontario and the various other bike routes, the fact you can take your bikes on a bus. I mean, completely unthinkable in London, and you can't even take your bikes on the tube for most of it. So even 2 bikes per carriage on a SkyTrain is an advantage. So I was impressed with Vancouver. It's not perfect, and of course there's the city of Vancouver, and there's the rest of Metro Vancouver, and cycling infrastructure is very patchy. But just getting back to London, a funny thing started happening in London a few years ago. This is an example. Sorry, can you go back? I'll just show that. Yeah, this is just an example of some of the infrastructure that. So infrastructure in London tends to be badly conceived and poorly put together. So you basically don't ride on the bike routes; you avoid them because if you're going any sort of speed, they're useless. But as I say, something funny started happening in London over the last few years, which is that people have started riding their bikes. It's been a huge revolution in London. There's been a 100% increase in people riding in the last 10 years. Just from 2003 to 2004, people riding into central London went up 23%. It's actually noticeable in London now. This is a morning commute, and that's what you see. You just see swarms of cyclists riding in. And it's quite hard to really work out what happened, why this has started happening. I mean, I've researched it, I've tried to look for reasons. There's a few things going on. There's a congestion charge in London. It costs you £8 to drive to the centre of London. But not many people really drove to the centre of London anyway. There's no parking, it's incredibly expensive, and the public transport's so good that you generally don't need to. But it probably had an effect. There were the bombs, I think it was in 2005, the bombs on the tubes and tube underground train and the buses, and that drove, that got some people on their bikes. But it just seemed to have generally people got sick of waiting for the infrastructure to improve, so they just got on their bikes and they started riding. And a really interesting thing happened. I mean, whereas bike journeys are up hugely, and not just in London but in Bristol and Cambridge and cities across the UK, bike injuries are down by 1/3 over the same period. So what seems to be happening is safety in numbers. You might not have improved infrastructure, but you have so many more cyclists on the road. I mean, you can't run all of those people over, really. So I think if you take London as an example of a city with really poor infrastructure, but you look at what's happening there, it's clear there's some sort of tipping point going on there. And what happens is, I think that as a result of people just riding, injuries go down, but also politicians respond and they start building the infrastructure. Because they have to respond to this, because enough people are voting with their wheels for them to have to respond. So, the question then is, how does Vancouver compare, or is Vancouver is the same sort of thing happening in Vancouver? The one thing I say is we've both got cycling mayors. This is the inimitable Boris Johnson showing everybody how to do it. Which of course helps. I mean, if you've got somebody who's got the influence, who's riding those routes, then it's going to help. And obviously we've got figure Robson here in the city of Vancouver at least. But we've also got cycling politicians. We've got North Vancouver. We've got a very supportive mayor, and across Metro Vancouver, there's a lot of mayors who really get cycling. So as far as the tipping point goes, I mean, first of all, what do we mean by a tipping point? My take on it would be, we don't mean that we've become a Copenhagen or an Amsterdam or wherever else, or a Portland or a perfect cycling city. What it seems to me is that we've kind of reached the top of the hill, and it starts, we may not be freewheeling down the other side, but things start to get easier because it's becoming part of the culture, and because it's becoming more mainstream. I mean, I would love to think that's happening in Vancouver. I think it's clear that something's happening in Vancouver. I think that wherever you look, cycling is in the news and is kind of all over the place. Amanda did some research on this for me, and this is a search on media coverage of cycling just for the summer of 2009. there were about 200 articles in mainstream media in Lower Mainland, and that's not including the controversial stuff, the polarised stuff about Burrough Street Bridge and all of the other things. It was about the Central Valley Greenway and Bike to Work Week and the VACC's Great Rides and all of the other events and things that were going on, and also just general, lifestyle pieces about cycling. So, I mean, I know I live on the North Shore, and 2 weeks running, front page photo on the front of the North Shore News was cycling. It was sports cycling both times. It was the police and fire games time trial up Cypress Mountain or Seymour Mountain, and then some juniors who were in the BC or in the Canadian squad. But it's cycling, and they print it because they know that people are going to be interested. And elsewhere, when you look around, I mean, Bike to Work Week, we know that this is hugely popular, and it continues to be popular. People signing up to record their commutes and take part. So we know that people are still riding to work. Great Rides, which I just mentioned, this new program the VACC started to get people out to do 20-kilometre recreation rides. We've had lots of people turning up and saying this is the first time they've been out on their bike in years, but they've been itching to get back. Streetwise cycling courses we run, helping people to learn to ride. To ride safely in traffic. We know that those are really popular, and bike shops are just swamped. I mean, there's an economic downturn, but bike shops are just overrun with repairs and the sales. So we know that something's going on. And also, I mean, I don't know if anybody's ridden to Horseshoe Bay on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning lately. It's absolutely full of cyclists of all shapes and sizes riding to Horseshoe Bay and back. And I would say as a result, that's a far safer route. There's absolutely no cycling infrastructure, there's no shoulder, but there are lots and lots of cyclists. So anybody who's driving that route knows there's probably going to be a cyclist around the corner. And from the political or government perspective, I mean, the VACC, we've had support this year from places that have never supported us before. Delta have funded us. Maple Ridge, Port Coquitlam, we've got a great ride. Pitt Meadows, I was in Coquitlam yesterday talking about streetwise courses. New West, Langley, I mean, and if you look at Surrey's master plan for transport, it's all about cycling. So it's at the grassroots level, but also there is political will behind it. Not enough money, of course, and there needs to be more pressure, but I think there is a sign that things are changing. So I just wanted to give an example of a friend of mine, just as an example of what's happening and how this I think is going to this is helping us to reach a tipping point. I've got a friend who was he's reaching the age where he's starting to put on a little bit of weight. And so he wants to do something about it. He's got an old bike, but he decides he wants to push himself a bit, so he starts riding that to work. And he upgrades and gets himself a nice new bike. And then he signs up for the Cure to Conquer Cancer, which is a real motivation for him. So he rides to work as training for that, and he signs up for Bike to Work Week. And he rides along the Low Heat Highway, and he can see what the conditions are like there. And hey presto, you've got a bike advocate there. We've got what we've had for years is really committed bike advocates, people who have really embraced the cycling lifestyle and have made incredible changes in the city. But what we're starting to see now is people who are getting bikes for leisure purposes, and they're riding and they're discovering riding to work because it's fun and it's far better than sitting in a car and driving. And straight away you're starting to develop this core of cycling advocates. And I think the challenge for us is to make sure that we seize that opportunity, and we make sure that those people who are riding to work or are riding to Horseshoe Bay understand that there is that they can be part of a bigger movement and really help to push change through. Yeah, I mean, just on that note, I think it's cycling is now being called the new golf, because so many people of a certain age are trading in their golf clubs for carbon fibre bikes, and the Lycra and all the rest of it. And that's part of the continuum. And for every person who's out for a leisure ride, we've got one more person who's less likely to run you over because they understand what cycling's about. I mean, on that note, this friend I'm talking about, I mean, quite recently they just bought a second car, a giant Volvo SUV. And I'm sure that when he gets home from work, he hangs the bike up when he gets in the car and he drives to the supermarket to do his shopping. The next great leap is to convince people that there is something beyond cycling as a sport or as cycling to work, and that cycling can be a part of the lifestyle. They can leave the car and they can trade in the SUV for a cargo bike, and they can actually use their bike in all areas of their life. And I think the challenge there is making a big enough incentive for people to do that, or a big enough disincentive for people to drive their car. And I think that's probably one of the next big challenges.